If you're like me or most of our listeners, you're obsessed with finding an edge for your streaming strategy. One of my favorite ways to find that edge for state of streaming is through the tools and data from our friends at Looper Insights. So I asked them to put together a suite of the best stuff just for you. You can get it. Visit mystreamingvalue.com to compare the value of CTV home screens, which space is worth the most, what makes Roku so valuable that Fox is willing to pay $22 billion for it. Find out at mystreamingvalue.com. And thank you to our friends at Looper Insights for making all of these resources available. Now, time for the episode. Will the future of streaming really command $100 CPMs? And is YouTube actually considered TV? Spoiler alert, the consumer settled that debate years ago. Welcome back to the State of Streaming podcast. I am joined today by Michael Beach of Cross Screen Media, the author of Screen Wars, the book, and the ongoing weekly Substack State of Screens. We are breaking down convergent TV. We're exploring why local advertising holds the keys to the next billion-dollar streaming exit. We're going to discuss what political ad spend can teach us about how to measure modern media. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button to catch all of our latest insights. Now, onto the interview. Michael Beach, Screen Wars Media, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You and I, last time we caught up, you'd outlined what the next billion-dollar company in streaming looks like. And I thought that would be a fun place to start for our audience. Can you bring us up to speed? The next billion-dollar streaming company, where are they coming from? What do they look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like you look at, even the last decade in kind of the broader ad tech area, and definitely now as we're getting to, focus on video, but the best exits from that area have been companies like, recently we had Vibe, and you had, companies like Simplify and MadHive and people that reached $1 billion valuation. And the interesting thing is that, one, they're not the companies that raise the most money. And two, they're also not the companies that are hyper-focused on kind of high profile national advertising. People we always see at trade events and with great press, a lot of times are focused on local or niche advertisers, maybe direct to consumer. They're not focused on the biggest brands. And I find that really interesting because when we started Cross Screen Media, we kind of went through the same thing. Like we didn't raise, we only raised $2.3 million to start the company. And, the next probably smallest company raised $65 million. And we were trying to figure out, well, why is this? And what we found out was that when you get into kind of the New York big ad business, you're dealing with a small number of ad buyers and agencies. They have tremendous pricing power. So it's hard for you to build a profitable product. And they just haven't really created great businesses. They're very high profile. They've raised a ton of capital, but they aren't nearly as good at businesses that we've seen exit. Because once private equity or somebody who's really looking at the financials looks at it, the people they're giving the $1 billion exit to are these companies that are maybe focused on local or focused on a smaller advertiser where maybe you can have higher margin products because instead of dealing with 200 brands total, you're dealing with 50,000 brands or more. And you've seen it also when you look at, a company like Facebook, right? Like they have the highest margin ad product out there, but they're not making most of their money from Procter & Gamble. They're making it from 10 million different advertisers across the country. And I think we found a huge disconnect, both when we talk to media companies in New York, but also ad tech and other companies where they just don't really, they kind of look at what we do as a backwater and we're like, well, it's actually a much better place to be.
It's really interesting. Traditionally, TV has depended on 80% of the revenue coming from those top 100 advertisers. A bit dated, but that was a Moffett-Nathanson stat that I thought was really compelling leading into this conversation because of what you just described. It's that long tail of local and who can crack the code on that. You mentioned one of your companies, Cross Screen Media. Your focus is all local. Why is local such a challenge?
Well, we came out of the political space and kind of before that, I'd co-founded an agency, and we kind of always assumed that there would be companies out there solving our problem. And so, for a number of years, we hesitated to build our own products. But what we found was that most, again, kind of going back to that New York mindset, you couldn't go below really the top 20 markets. And so, they would look at Denver as being a small city And we're like, well, we need to be in, Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Des Moines and Dayton, Ohio. And so we started to build out our own tech around what would this look like if you had to go into all 210 media markets. And there are definitely, again, trade-offs you have to make, but our customers, they had to be there, right? That was where, their battles were. And then we looked at it and said, well, everybody in local marketing has this problem, right? Because there is no product for, roughly 190 of the 210 media markets. They don't get anything, right? They don't get any measurement. They're the last people to get everything. And so we built our product to be, for other ad agencies, but focused on the local space.
And you wrote, I see it in your background there, I've got my copy here, Screen Wars in 2024, and you covered the topic of convergent TV. It's a term that I'm hearing more of today in 2026, but can you give us like the definition? What is convergent TV?
Yeah, there's probably two big cuts of that. And the simplest is kind of the convergence of linear TV and streaming. So you're really still talking about the big screen, and that's the most common use case today. But as with kind of the book and cross-screen media and Screen Wars media behind me, obviously with us showing a phone with rabbit ears, we think the big picture long term is this is really a battle for attention across all these devices. And we're not here today. Like there are very few media agencies that are doing all of those things, right? The same person is not looking at local ABC News, Amazon Prime and TikTok, right? But that is long-term where in the consumer's mind, the lines are blurring for what they consider to be a substitute good and where they're moving their attention. And long-term, we see that actually convergent TV is going to include all of these things.
Political, we're coming into a midterm election season. It's starting to ramp up. That's a big piece of where your focus is. What are you seeing political wise as streaming takes hold, convergent TV, video everywhere, thinking about all of these things from a political application? What do you see?
Yeah, political is amazing because it's a test lab. And the fact that you can get people to try, you can almost live multiple lives in one election cycle where they will try something. If it works, try another thing, keep going. Whereas, you look at that kind of more brand advertising. They're like, well, next year we'll do this and next year we'll do this. And in political, we can actually float an idea and have it market in the same week. So for us, it's always been a blessing that we've been able to try so many different things there because everyone's, the places that get the most attention are truly 50-50 races, and anything can give an edge and be the reason for, victory or defeat. And so it's just been an incredible test lab for us.
All right. So you're leading us in perfectly to the measurement conversation. In political, it's very black and white. Did we win? Did we lose? There's not a lot of debate. It doesn't matter what the performance was on a dashboard. We're looking for an outcome. So when we think about measurement, there's so many layers to that. There's like the planning and strategy and audience understanding, psychographic, demographic, all of these sorts of things. And then there's the more bottom funnel, what the advertiser cares about, what hits my P&L, measurement of outcomes. How do you approach measurement, maybe broadly as a concept, but then specifically when you're talking with an advertiser, how do you broach that conversation?
I think at the high level, you want to have, your reachability is obviously a massive thing, and it's an old school metric, but it plays an even more important role now that you're across so many different channels. We believe if you took all streaming and all linear TV and you say the 2024 election, about 13% of the battleground, the targeted voters, the persuadable voters, never saw a single streaming or TV ad because they just were not reachable on those things. And you think about all the billions of dollars. Well, if you're in a 50-50 race and you tell me that 13% of the people didn't see any of those ads, the obvious question is, well, how do we reach them? Right. And so people are starting political once they get that first level of measurement, then they're like, well, now what do we do? And that's where you get into other things. Right. And you see this kind of in the broader streaming ecosystem where you've got a performance marketing group and you've got kind of the brand marketing. Those worlds are rapidly colliding, right? To where if you're running an ad, it's not always 100% one or the other. Right. And also how you value that inventory, where if you're only doing direct response, you're only valuing it on a conversion happening, you're going to shut off a lot of your media because it's not performing, right? And you're going to move money to Facebook or another channel. But if you said, all right, well, what is the actual brand impact I'm getting from this? What is that worth to me? And then what is the actual conversion impact of this? What am I getting? a lot more inventory looks like a good idea, but we're just really in the early phases of looking at that. And I think political is going to be one of the places you're going to see that happen first.
Do you have a perspective on YouTube's role in all of this? There's debate, obviously, is YouTube TV. It's kind of like cable. YouTube TV, it's like a SaaS wrapper. To an advertiser, I don't think they much care, but do you have thoughts on how YouTube fits into all this?
Oh yeah. I mean, every time I write about YouTube being TV, people lose their minds. Writing about that and writing about how ad prices are going to go up are the two things like I know I can trigger.
We're going to get to that too. Yeah.
I know I can trigger our audience pretty well, but YouTube's clearly TV. I think that's, that argument by the consumer has been settled for years. I think when you look at their ad business, you can say, all right, are they a TV ad business? And I'd say they're not yet there on that, but to the consumer, it totally is. But the way they package their product probably to the ad market, both at the local and national level, they've got tremendous room to grow. And I mean, that's probably why I'm so bullish on them as a company, is that I don't think they're doing an amazing job at this yet, but they've got so much momentum and they're capturing the attention. And that is actually the number one thing, is that if you don't have the consumer's attention, then the best ad offering in the world doesn't matter. If you have the attention and you haven't even figured out the ad part, the sky's the limit for you. And so companies like YouTube and Netflix, I'm extremely bullish on, even though I don't think either one has really figured out the ad side yet.
Is there room, do you think, for, does a Fox and Roku combo deal, does that start to put on equal footing against like Amazon, a YouTube, Walmart plus Vibe plus Vizio? Like, there's a lot of consolidation we're seeing. There's a lot of M&A going on. Is it just YouTube and then everyone else, or is there a contender that can take YouTube on?
I don't know that I'd say that, those guys, like a Roku is growing, right? And so, a Fox, you could say, all right, they've been pretty stagnant and they're spending a lot of money on sports rights to kind of maintain their position. But of the kind of traditional players, they probably had the best strategy, up until today, but they're definitely growing, right? And they're eating, Roku channel now is eating into probably, cable at the most, right? Where you're seeing cable decline, then you see Tubi and Roku channel and these things gain. It's probably coming directly out of there. YouTube, to me, an oversimplified view. If you went back into olden days when you had 3 broadcast stations and you just be simple, said, okay, NBC, ABC, and CBS each had 33% of the time. To me, that is like the zenith, like the ceiling. But I can completely see YouTube meeting or even slightly exceeding that. And that is a shock to people because they're growing so rapidly. And at the same time, people are still kind of ignoring it because they're arguing, well, they're not TV. And I just think people's behaviors are changing so fast. I even look at my own, where a lot of my wife and I will watch a show maybe for 20 minutes before we go to sleep. And then I'll watch something else maybe after she falls asleep. And traditionally, I would then flip over to Netflix or HBO Max or whatever to watch something. And now, a lot of the time, I'm watching YouTube. Like I'm going on my watch later, hitting the thing, and it's not high production content, but I think that the people's behaviors are changing, and kind of Madison Avenue is making the same argument they made 10 years ago. And I think that's over.
It's interesting. I've noticed that a lot recently myself, where I'll go to an app that I pay for, can't find anything to watch, and then my default is just YouTube. I just go to YouTube because I know there's going to be something there within a few clicks or scrolls that I do want to watch. And I'm not going to sit here frustrated that I'm paying for a thing and still can't find anything to watch. And definitely to my son, ask a kid, hey, what's TV? It's YouTube. YouTube is TV. And I think even just playing that out a little bit, I can't imagine my son paying for an app when he is an adult living on his own. I just can't imagine that. So yeah, a lot there to be had in the YouTube piece. There's a big gap between the bid and the ask. You pointed this out in one of our recent conversations between CPMs today, a hot topic button conversation for everyone, CPMs, and projected increased ad spend with the attention share and demand on streaming. There are a number of things that go into that kind of don't add up. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, we've got a really simple way of looking at this. If you say, okay, the market's going to grow, let's say 10% in the next 5 years, and you go in a room of people on the buying and selling side kind of consensus, yeah, we agree that's going to happen. And then the next thing is, all right, well, ad inventory is going to go down because as time shifts to streaming, the percent of streaming that's ad supported is lower than what's on linear. Like linear's 85, 90% plus time, streaming's in the probably the 60s, 70s now. A larger share of that hour doesn't have any ads at all. But then the share that does have ads has a much lower ad load. And so, linear TV's got 16 minutes per hour of ads. You see 4 to 12 minutes at the most on streaming. And so a lower share of the time has ads, and then a fewer ads are running. And now that's, the gap is starting to close, but it's those two things together compound to mean there's a lot fewer ad opportunities. And so you look out and we built a model to go all the way out to 2035 on this and said that even then we're probably going to be about 11% fewer impressions than we have today. And so if the market has gone up 10% and the inventory has gone down 11, those two compound on each other to mean CPMs are going to go up a lot faster than inflation. And that, people think is crazy. But then you look at, again, you go back to a platform like Facebook where advertisers are probably paying a CPM on Facebook that's greater than what they're paying on streaming for that little ad running that they just flip by. And that's because they've brought in so many new advertisers into their auction environment that are valuing that inventory compared to what streaming has. And we're like, if you can replicate any part of that, you can get a much higher CPM. And we say, the future is $100 CPMs, which drives people totally insane. But we already see that in political, right? Like at first, you go into a battleground state and look on TV, they're paying $100 CPM on broadcast TV to carpet bomb where only maybe 5% of the people are their actual target, right? And so you end up with an equivalent of $1,000 eCPM. Well, if you went to that advertiser and said, I can give you addressable advertising for $100 to these people, they would take it every time, right? So then you compare the two. In the book, I have a car dealership in Atlanta and said, all right, well, if you took you drew a polygon around a car dealership, so no one would drive more than 20 miles to get a car, which I think is still excessive, but to be conservative. And then you said, all right, just doing that one thing made, them already with a several $100 eCPM. And then you said, okay, now I'll put a flag of only people that we think are in market to buy any type of vehicle, luxury car, truck, SUV, anything, next 12 months. And then you got up to $1,000 eCPM. Again, you went to that group and said, I will sell you the same audience for $100. They would buy it every time. It's just no one is currently doing that other than Facebook. They're stuck on what do we have to do to get the top 200 advertisers? Because everything, their sales forces in New York, they're, it's like you go to the Super Bowl, you go to CES. It's a great process, but it's missing a huge part of the market. And back to your earlier point, you get a company like Vibe, they exit for $1 billion because they're hitting that other part of the market.
One of the points that I've seen you make recently is about the relationship between the silver screen, movie theater attendance, and that relationship to streaming. I recently went to see The Odyssey with my son. We both really loved it. Is there a relationship between the silver screen and streaming?
Well, there's for sure an economic relationship because, how you pay for the content is becoming, a huge thing. And that we saw it in COVID where you can't yet monetize a $200 million movie effectively. You look at what you got to add subs and all those things, like no one was really able to hit those numbers. Netflix is still spending a lot of money on movies, but probably, I don't think nearly as much as they were a few years ago. And then everyone else is trying to get it back into the theater. But if the theater doesn't get back to where it was, and we looked at it from inflation, if you adjusted for what's happened since 2020 on inflation, it's about 35% below where we were in 2019. And that's a pretty big hit, right? And you're starting to see this where there aren't as many huge, big budget movies going out. There's not as much getting spent on marketing spend. So the studios are starting to rationalize, but they haven't yet figured out how to do streaming in the theater together and recreate the level we had a couple of years ago. And it's an area I'm rooting for. Right? I love going to the movies. I think that it's a challenging environment, and you just haven't seen the business get recreated where we were.
All right, I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but you just made me think of it. Does this Paramount WBD deal, does that ever close, do you think?
I assume so. Like I think that you've got the people in Hollywood making noise that it's going to cut the number of buyers, which is a legitimate point, but you've got to look at the health of these businesses on their own and who they're competing with. And they can't compete with YouTube, Netflix, and Amazon without some scale, right? And you could say that scale not properly managed isn't going to do any better, but you have to assume that these businesses are going to be run really well. They're going to figure out how to make the most of the assets they have together, and that they can compete with these other people. And even at Disney, like, I don't know that they're set up correctly to compete, and they're in the best spot of anybody, not named YouTube or Netflix. But the economics for these businesses are much more challenging than people think. And there's a huge disconnect. Like, if you talk to somebody that is in ad sales or in content procurement, they think everything's fine. But you talk to the people that talk to Wall Street and they're freaked out, right? And so it's just a total from the same company, but two people. And we try to kind of bridge the gap there on our writing.
John Turn is taking over as Apple CEO later this fall. Do you think Apple TV makes any interesting moves?
Yeah, they're interesting. I mean, they have some fantastic content. It's on its own, obviously not a great business. I don't know if they care. Like, it's hard
to tell. Do they care or not?
Yeah, it's super hard. I mean, they're spending a lot of money still, and it's high quality, which is kind of the Apple way.
Yes.
I use them as a proxy a lot of times for other things. I think I did one where I showed that, more people watch Gunsmoke on Fast than watch Apple TV's everything. The catalog.
Oh, wow.
And
that's good.
Gunsmoke is a fraction of what they spend on content. But again, they could see that and they're like, well, we don't care. So I don't know.
We don't care.
Yeah.
Right. Thinking about the Apple core business, it's that vertically connected kind of tech consumer lifestyle. Right. The content could just be, it's just a nice value add for being an Apple customer.
Yeah.
Having it integrated to the rest of your life.
And I don't think they can go, a few years ago, we would have said they're going to bid on the NBA. They're going to bid on, maybe not the NFL, but the next tier down. But with what's happened with MLS, I don't know that, they could have all the money in the world. I don't know that those leagues would sell them their main rights, because it is really, the audience has been so small.
That's a great point. Would the league entertain that opportunity? Something to pay attention to. Michael, if folks want to learn more about your work, connect with you, you've got an incredible Substack. Tell us about the Substack.
Yeah, stateofthescreens.com. We've written every week for 480 weeks straight now. So
incredible.
Almost 10 years straight. And just, love the feedback.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to having a future conversation with you about many of the things we've talked about here today. We'll look for some updates down the road, and certainly there's going to be new stuff to talk about.
Perfect.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much. We'll link to all of that nearby. So if you are listening and you found this conversation to be helpful, please share it with a colleague or a client. Start a conversation yourself today. Check out Michael's content. Get the book. Screen Wars. Get up to speed. It's full. Michael, what blew me away about the book is how well cited and documented everything is. Like, it's small, it's bite-sized. You could throw this in your back pocket, but it is loaded. All killer, no filler. Great work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll see y'all next time.